Well, so today for the live stream, I'm going to be reading this book. This is what I'm going to be doing for subsequent live streams until I finish this book. And The Life of Actor Jim Varney. Stuff that verse. I haven't read it yet, so we're going to be reading it. It was written. Uh, Justin Lloyd is Jim Varney's nephew. He spent over 5 years researching and writing The Importance of Being Ernest, the life of actor Jim Varney. It is his first book. Justin lives with his family in central Kentucky. All right, so there you have it. I'm looking forward to this book. Looks like we got 25 chapters. I will read the preface. It doesn't look very long, anyhow. Jim Varney was my uncle, the younger brother of my mother, Sandra. Most people know him by the iconic Ernest P. Worrell, character he portrayed in thousands of commercials, nearly a dozen movies, and a Saturday morning TV show. But to me, he was Uncle Jim, the multi-talented sensation of our family. You never knew a room was dark until he lit it up. I actually don't believe he had an off switch. There weren't enough hours in the day for Jim to soak up all that life had to offer. Whether he was collecting antiques or poring over Civil War history, acting or writing songs, Jim was a full-blown participant in countless pursuits. Jim was a loving brother, a devoted son, and an amazing uncle. And in any other family, I would have been considered the funny one. But in our family, Jim left me in the dust. And he was so talented, I was just happy to have a front row seat during his visits. He was also smart, caring, and had a DeLorean. What more could a young nephew ask for? In addition, like everyone, Jim had his personal heartbreaks and internal struggles. Despite the simpleton he portrayed as Ernest, in his soul, Jim was an artist of incredible diversity. And when he died in 2000, a light went out not only for his fans, but for my family. I was compelled to write this book because I knew much more about Jim's life. I knew much more about Jim's life remained to be told than was out there in popular culture. I wanted Jim's fans to truly know who he was. I could re- I could rely on someone else to tell the story of one of the most notable people in my family's history, or I could, deep breath, attempt it myself. To numerous people, Jim was Ernest. And love Ernest or hate him, the truth is that Jim brought something special to that character that made Ernest unforgettable in the same way Charlie Chaplin embodied the little tramp. Jim's trajectory to stardom was not unlike that of other famous actors and celebrities. He was the class clown who dropped out of high school. He moved away to follow his acting dreams and struggled and starved in New York before heading to Los Angeles to try and break into television. Despite landing some promising roles and appearing on Johnny Carson, nothing ever really gelled for Jim in Southern California. He became intimate with failure and rejection. Finally, in 1980, at the age of 31, during one of the lowest points in his life, Jim's career took an unexpected turn. A small Nashville ad agency created a character to advertise a theme park in Kentucky. The character, Ernest, would bring Jim fame, fortune, and countless opportunities. At the same time, Ernest ultimately became his identity on screen and off, and that proved difficult for Jim to overcome when he tried to expand as an actor. Still, with with roles such as Jed Clampett in the movie version of the Beverly Hillbillies and being the voice of Slinky Dog in the groundbreaking animated film Toy Story, Jim persevered. Although Jim was only 50 when he died, he brought laughter and entertainment to more people than he could ever imagine. Luckily for the world, much of Jim's work was captured on film for generations to discover. In this book, I have attempted to offer the most comprehensive account of Jim's life as possible within the means available to me. My goal has been to provide the insight of a family member coupled with the objectivity of a journalist. I have combed through hundreds of newspapers and magazines and online sources. Numerous people who played significant roles in Jim's story had never spoken to the media. Interviewing many of them, including my own family members, enabled me to capture the essence of who Jim was, in addition to the uncle I knew and loved. In the end, I believe I have painted a more complete picture of Jim than has been done before. A comprehensive list of my sources can be found in the notes section at the end of this book. My goal has been accuracy and a 360-degree view of Jim. Yet, despite my best efforts, I was unable to reach everyone mentioned in this book. I had to rely on other sources to reconstruct the past. Every attempt has been made to be accurate and respectful of those I was unable to interview, as well as protect their privacy as much as possible, while still including the impact that had on Jim's life. Writing this book has taken over 5 years. It has been one of the most challenging tasks I have ever undertaken. Yet every struggle along the way, and there have been many, has been worth it, and I feel honored to be in the position to share the story of a man who meant so much to so many. I hope that I have created a work that pays proper tribute to Jim's legacy, one he would be proud of, were he still here. Justin Lloyd, Versailles, Kentucky, August 2013. So that was over 12 years ago, I guess. All right, so we got chapter one. It's called Shotgun Wedding. Two young bridesmaids, 12 and 14, entered the living room of their modest Kentucky home. The bride, their older sister, follows. They all make their way to a makeshift altar where a young minister awaits. Now comes the groom, followed by the bride's much younger brother, pressing. Is that a shotgun to the groom's back? Yes, it is. Yet the bride and groom are surprisingly cheerful as they exchange vows. A contrast to the bride's grief stricken mother sitting on a nearby sofa, wringing her tear soaked handkerchief into a small bowl. The little brother carrying the toy shotgun is 7-year-old Jim Varney, who will one day become the 20th century pop culture phenomenon known as Ernest. The wedding is actually a 45-second silent home movie filmed in 1956, appropriately titled Shotgun Wedding. The actors were members of the McCord and Varney families, connected by James Varney Sr. and his sister Iona McCord. Jim's cousin Ed McCord filmed the ceremony. Jim's mother arguably stole the show with her melodramatic cameo. Her early days performing in church plays had made her an obvious choice to portray the bride's mother. The fact that the girl playing the bride was her real life daughter seemed to enhance her method acting approach. It was fitting that her part involved the exaggerated use of a prop. In the slapstick brand of humor that would come to define her son's acting career, the ability to draw laughs from the simplest of items would be the integral part of his appeal. Shotgun Wedding remains a timeless reminder of the humor of the Varney family while revealing one of the many ways they cultivated Jim's passion for entertainment. All right, that was a very short chapter, so we'll read chapter two too. Uh, the beginning. I guess I should have started with the beginning. The names that Jim answered to throughout his life were as varied as the characters he portrayed. Jimmy, Jimbo, Bo, Elvis, Dylan, Ernest, Vern, and Hey Vern Guy. His two wives and his close friends simply called him Varney. Jim was named after his father, James Albert Varney Sr., who was born in a small coal mining town of Norton, Virginia, on January 1st, 1910. Big Jim was the fourth of 8 children and the firstborn son of a coal miner named Andrew Varney and his second wife, Rena. Andrew and Rena had moved from Andrew's hometown of Varney, Washington, or There's some abbreviations that's kind of hard to figure out what he's saying, but it looks like, oh, West Virginia. Oh, okay. Uh, I just guess I haven't seen it in text. To Norton to find employment just after their oldest child Roxy was born. By the time James Sr. was about 15, his father had moved everyone 100 miles northeast back to Varney. Author's note: I could not find a definitive link in my research between the town's name and Jim's ancestry, although there may very well be one. Varney is a small unincorporated town located in Mingo County. The town of Matawan, just southwest of Varney, is also located in Mingo. Matawan, across the border of eastern Kentucky along the banks of the Tug Fork River, was still dealing with the aftermath of the famous Matawan massacre when James Sr. was coming of age. The incident, which took place in 1920, was a shootout between a group of striking coal miners employed by the Stone Mountain Coal Company, lo- local lawmen sympathetic to their plight, and mine detectives hired to evict the miners from their company owned houses. John Sayles' critically acclaimed 1987 film Matawan brought to life this violent episode while illuminating the oppression endured by early Appalachian coal miners. The Mingo County area is also noted for serving as the backdrop for much of the Hatfield McCoy feud in the late 1800s. The Varneys were linked to the Hatfield family by blood and marriage. Andrew Varney's first cousin was Lavisa Chafin, the wife of William Anderson Devil Ants Hatfield. John Henderson Varney, Andrew's uncle, married Devil Ann's sister. Martha Hatfield Larkin and Andrew were two of their sons. Although Jim's grandfather was known to have directly participated in the feud, his cousins Larkin and Andrew did. Or wasn't known to have participated in the feud, his cousins Larkin and Andrew did. Larkin, sometimes referred to as Lark, was portrayed by actor Noah Taylor in the popular Hatfield and McCoy's movie starring Kevin Costner that aired on the History Channel in 2012. The Varneys were linked to the feuding family by blood and marriage. So I guess if you want to, let's take a look at that. I mean, I don't know much about that feud. I've heard of it, but I don't know much about it. For whatever reason, Jim and his sister were never made aware of their strong family connection to the Hatfields. They did grow up hearing stories about grandfather Andrew Varney hunting squirrel with members of the Hatfields, but that was the extent of their knowledge. Perhaps Jim's father was not even fully aware of the family connection himself, since it wasn't exactly something his parents would want to boast about during the years following the bloody feud. What shaped the children's view of their father's upbringing even more, besides old family stories, was the one family trip they took to West Virginia in the early 1950s. Jim's sister Jake vividly remembers the visit. In 1949, green Plymouth was our second car. It wasn't new and it wasn't air conditioned, but few cars were at that time. It had gray upholstery and even room for all six of us if Jim sat on Mama's lap. Daddy wanted to take us all to West Virginia to see his family, some of whom he hadn't seen since he left to join the Army in 1931. He went in the summer of 1952, just before school started, when Jim was 2. It would be a trip of about 10 hours with frequent stops to gas stations, not to use the bathroom, but to wash our faces and hose vomit off the car. To say it was a miserable trip would be to put it mildly. We all got carsick and vomited out the windows. The car was like an oven, and the road was one curve after another through the mountains of eastern Kentucky. We visited several of Daddy's elderly aunts and some cousins and their families. They still called Daddy Ab, a shortened version of his middle name Albert, for the most part. They were miners. We saw living conditions far below our own. Daddy's family was fairly well educated and had more than most, but those who got their education and moved back to West Virginia couldn't find work not connected to coal mining. The drive back from West Virginia was not as traumatic as the ride there. It rained for most of the way home. We cracked the car windows and the car was much cooler. We pulled into our home in Bluegrass Park, a government housing project, and thought we were rich. We never went to West Virginia again as a family, though Mama and Daddy visited Daddy's nephew often. Jim was never realized Jim never realized the life we might have had if Daddy had stayed in West Virginia. Jim jokingly told people he was a Hill William instead of a hillbilly. Oh, a Hill William instead of a hillbilly. He was from a large city, far away from a hill of any sort. Yet he admired mountain people and let everyone believe he was one of them. Coal mining defined much of Appalachian life in the early 1900s as the region's precious resources brought in big coal companies. Unfortunately, the ease with which a young man could find a coal mining job was offset by its dangers. Jim's father was experienced firsthand when he began working for the Red Jacket Coal Mining Company in Mingo County at 16. His younger brother Sam had joined him as the responsibility for providing for much of the family's income fell on their shoulders. Their father was unable to work after suffering a chest injury during a mine cave in. After 5 years at the mine with only a 5-cent raise, bringing his wage to 55 cents an hour, James Sr. decided he had had enough and quit the mine in 1931 after a chance meeting with an army recruiter at a local mine store. Before long, Jim's father was looking out upon the sunny beaches of Hawaii, where he would be stationed for the next 3 years. He must have felt like a million miles away from the depths of the West Virginia coal mines, where sunlight and fresh air were non existent. James Sr. made sure a portion of his army checks were mailed back to West Virginia to support his family. He also kept up his correspondence with many of his siblings, including sisters Iona and Cecilia, who had moved to Lexington, Kentucky. Cecilia's letters soon included an extra page or two from a new and single sister-in-law named Louise Howard. The correspondence made her brother eager to visit the city that Cecilia now called home. Jim's mother, Nancy Louise Howard, grew up the youngest of five in a farming community in Winchester, Kentucky, just east of Lexington. The acting in Jim's blood most likely came from his mother. Years before her son found worldwide fame with Ernest, Louise entertained members of the Macedonia Christian Church in Lexington, acting in various plays as a teenager. In the family register section of a Bible that Louise purchased in 1986, she recalled one of these plays. Just below the entry of her baptism date, she wrote, "Had the lead in backwoods school of 1849. At church it was fun." A few years later, Louise joined the church. Her family made a short move from Winchester to the outskirts of Lexington to the house farm known as Hamburg Place. There, her father, James Howard, worked as a horseman and gardener for John E. Madden, the world-renowned horse breeder. John Madden trained 5 Kentucky Derby winners on the Lexington farm. Today, the land is the site of a thriving commercial development, still called Hamburg Place. Along with his primary duties, James Howard assisted in other projects on the storied horse farm, such as the construction of a horse cemetery. Louise's mother, Annie Bell Howard, would outlive her husband by almost 25 years. Known as Granny to the Varney children, she was the only grandparent Jim and his sisters would ever know. She was a tiny woman, barely 5 feet tall, but one of the most capable women that they ever knew. Even in her early 60s, with her husband retired, she entered the workforce as a presser in a laundromat. Although Jim and his sisters only had one grandparent in their lives, they enjoyed a close relationship with a number of aunts and uncles living in Lexington. Louise's 2 sisters lived in town, Sally and Betty. Betty actually lived on the same street as Jim's family on the on two separate occasions. Jim's sister, James Sr.'s sister Iona, deaf from a childhood illness, had settled in Lexington with her husband, uh, Winfield. They met at a deaf school. Iona and Winfield had three sons: Win, Jack, and Ed. Man, he's getting really, I mean, we know the whole lineage, don't we? Jack and Ed, although none were deaf, they all signed as if it was a second language. Ed, the youngest, could sign so fast that he was nicknamed Fast Eddie. None of Jim's relatives played a more significant role in Jim's life than the aunt and uncle who brought the Howard and Varney families together. Louise's older brother, Everett, worked in Lexington as a painter and dabbled in everything from plasterwork to the tasks associated with the finishing carpenter. His work could be seen in many of the finer homes in Lexington, as well as the local theaters and downtown office buildings. It was in one of those theaters that he met James's sister, Cecilia. She had moved to Lexington with her first husband's family. She met Everett shortly after her husband's death. Everett and Cecilia married in 1928 and were in Lexington when the Great Depression arrived. During those tough times, they lived for a few years with Everett's parents at Hamburg Place. Cecilia got along well with Everett's family and became close friends with Louise. Uh, Cecilia mentioned to Louise that her younger brother was serving in the army. The more Cecilia talked about James, the more intrigued Louise became. She began writing him letters that Cecilia included in the envelopes of her own correspondence. James Sr. wrote back to Louise, and before long, the two were keeping in touch on a regular basis and counting the days until they could meet. That day finally came in the summer of 1934 when James Sr. finished his 3 year tour in Hawaii, and the first time Louise saw him, she was standing anxiously at the train station waiting for his arrival home. Cecilia helped point her brother out among the crowd of passengers. Not only was James Sr. tall and broad shouldered, when he smiled, his white teeth reminded Louise of a model in a Pepsodent toothpaste advertisement. Jim Varney's future parents spent the summer getting better acquainted before James Sr. was shipped overseas for another tour. He spent the next 3 years in the Philippines, where he eventually reached the rank of corporal. He and Louise continued to correspond and eventually married shortly after he returned to Lexington in 1938. Within the first 5 years of their marriage, Louise gave birth to two girls, Jo Gale and Janice Ann, who came to be known as Jake. Meanwhile, James Sr. found employment as a ward attendant at the Veterans Administration Hospital in Lexington. Louise stayed home raising the girls. The Varneys settled into a small residence in Bluegrass Park around 1940. They would stay 14 years opened in 1938. Bluegrass Park was one of the Lexington's first low-cost housing projects, and many other military families lived there. In March 1944, just as Louise learned she was pregnant with her third daughter, Sandra, or Sandy as she came to be called, James Sr. returned to active service. He was assigned to Camp Barkley outside of Abilene, Texas, where he guarded German prisoners at the POW camp, where World War II ended roughly a year later. James Sr. returned home to his family and his job at the hospital. A few years later, Louise finally gave birth to a son. James Albert Varney Jr. was born on June 15, 1949, at Good Samaritan Hospital in Lexington. Uh, Dr. A.J. Whitehouse helped bring Jim into the world. Whitehouse would become a local legend for delivering thousands of babies over 50 years. After three daughters, James Sr. was ready to welcome a son into the fold. Although not exactly tiny, Jim hardly resembled the 15-pound giant his father had claimed to have been as a newborn. Louise was so convinced she had been carrying another girl that she had actually made a dress for the baby to wear home, perhaps to help distinguish his name for the one he shared with his father. The family called the new arrival Jimbo, and sometimes Bo for short. All of Jim's sisters were excited to have a little brother, and each would have a role in helping to raise him. The baby became their new toy, and they never tired of playing with him. Often called the little sponge, Jim's ability to retain so much of what he read or heard amazed the family. It was not only the amount he retained that impressed them, but the early age at which it began. Sandy swears that Jim could read portions of their elementary school books before he was 3. The constant attention Jim received from his sisters would prove to be all the more important as he battled asthma from an early age. He had so much trouble breathing that he could occasionally break blood vessels in his eyes. When he was outside playing and experiencing an attack, one of his sisters was usually there to see that he went inside to recover. His mother stayed up many nights with him, sometimes holding his sleepy head over a vaporizer. The aroma of Vicks often filled the house in fall and winter, while the thermostat stayed turned up an extra notch to keep him warm. Jim became all too familiar with the rules of his condition, which made him long for spring and summer when many of his symptoms subsided. Unfortunately, the only treatment available then was a shot administered by a doctor who came to the house. The doctor told Jim's parents that he would outgrow his asthma, but would probably have problems with his lungs. True to the doctor's word, the episodes grew further apart as Jim matured. As far as anyone knows, he never had to use an inhaler. Because of Jim's asthma, his parents discussed the possibility of Big Jim transferring to another VA hospital located in a warmer climate. James Sr. had worked his way up to a physical therapist position while taking on additional duties that included organizing recreational activities and serving as a barber. But since his main specialty was so specific, options were limited. One opportunity they considered was Palo Alto, California. The children all wanted to go, but in the end, their mother could not bear to leave Lexington and her family. She decided to leave things as they were, hoping that Jim would get better. Along with his job and family obligations, Jim's father was extremely involved in the local community, having boxed as a young man, including earning a title while stationed in Hawaii. He was able to find work as a referee at many Golden Glove tournaments held in Lexington. He also worked at a parking lot as a parking lot attendant at the Keeneland racetrack during the spring and fall meets. Through his involvement with the VA, he participated in many of their volunteer activities and was active in his local Masonic lodge. Despite the extra money his side jobs brought in, Jim's father could not provide for his family in the way that he wanted. He did manage, however, to use the resources available to him to keep them entertained and physically active. With the VA hospital permission, he regularly brought recreational equipment from home to his children for his children to use. James Sr. made sure that even his daughters learned the skills essential to boxing. This included proficiency on the speed bag, where Joe Gale quickly became known as the most dangerous. Jim's father refereed boxing matches between the kids and their family. He enjoyed the time spent with the neighborhood kids throughout Jim's childhood. Many of them have fond memories today of Mr. Varney and credit him with teaching them good sportsmanship. The VA also let James Sr. bring his kids to swim in their indoor heated pools. He preferred to do this on Sunday afternoons just after the pools were cleaned. The children had the water to themselves for hours, and Jake and Sandy remember swimming there during winter, looking out the windows and watching the snow fall. Jim's father was successful in teaching all the children to swim except for Jim. Although he wanted to please his father, Jim always panicked as soon as his head began to go underwater. His sisters tried but never succeeded in helping him overcome his fear. Jim's father didn't always need equipment or a pool to whip his kids into shape. Many mornings before he went to school, Jim and his sisters were led through a multitude of exercises that included push-ups, sit-ups, and jumping jacks. Although he was not always easy keeping up with his older. It was not always easy keeping up with his older sisters. Jim's fitness level greatly improved over time. That helped control his asthma and added muscle to his thin frame. Jim's father enjoyed many other activities with his children. He demonstrated card tricks and participated in games such as checkers and chess, with the entire family joining in. These games became competitive. Bingo was played for nickels and dimes, and they were considered high stakes. As Jim grew older, he began to take an interest in the items his father had acquired while stationed in Hawaii and in the Philippines. This is where his lifelong fascination with knives, swords, and watches began. Jim soaked up every detail of the workmanship and the history of each item. This time also gave him the opportunity to connect with his father in ways he never could around athletics. Jim also pursued his own interests. He sang, danced, and mimicked characters he watched on TV. The ease with which Jim could pick up on the accent and mannerisms of a person carried over to musical instruments. Sister Jake remembers buying Jim a harmonica when he was around 8 years old. Jim immediately began playing a Stephen Foster tune called Ring Ring the Banjo. Surprised, Jake asked Jim how he could play the song so well. Jim told her he had heard the song somewhere and was just playing it back the way he remembered. A few years later, he showed the same natural ability on the Appalachian dulcimer he purchased. Before long, he was not only family he not it was not only family he entertained, but any neighborhood friends and classmates who showed Jim attention. Some, like neighbor Sonny Wilson, joined Jim on various routines. Years later, Jim credited Sonny for helping him develop his comedic abilities. Jim recalled once, Sonny was a real cut up. He'd wear weird things, put on weird hats. He and I were like the Marx Brothers. Through the years, the dinner table served as a sounding board for Jim and his sisters. There, everyone traded interesting stories that were often very funny. The Varney kids were encouraged to share anything they thought entertaining, but the kids' tales rarely topped their father's, which included experiences from his childhood in the Army and his job at the VA. All of his father's stories, the tales of growing up in the mountains, seemed to capture Jim's imagination the most. Although raised in the suburbs of Lexington, Jim came to identify strongly with the Varney's mountain heritage. This is partly because it was so inextricably linked to the father he admired so much. It's interesting to note that Jim's Ernest character became another hillbilly caricature that was commercialized and parodied in much the same way many of his Hatfield and Varney ancestors were portrayed. Because of this, it could be said that throughout modern American history, a handful of closely related Varneys have been largely responsible for some of the most popular representations of the stereotypical hillbilly. The communities in which Jim's father was raised endured many hardships due to poverty, demanding work and limited resources, yet they were also places where family, fellowship, music, and laughter sustained a person almost as much as a warm meal. Over time, Jim learned how to effortlessly, effort, effortlessly channel many of the colorful residents of these mountain haulers into his own unique characters. The absurdity of Jim's character, Lloyd Worrell, whose family pretends to eat supper, is such an example. The idea of a poor, starving family could not be more heartbreaking, but to watch Jim portray a man who slices into an imaginary steak while marveling over a weight-gaining son was endlessly entertaining. In addition to his father's influence, Jim drew some of his future material from other adults in the family. Jim's mother was a teetotaler, most likely as a result of watching alcohol ruin the lives of uncles and cousins. The second husband of one of Louise's older sisters was believed to be an alcoholic. From observing this uncle, young from observing this uncle, young Jim saw firsthand how someone drunk behaved. When Jim's oldest sister, Jo Gale, graduated from high school, the family hosted a party for her friends and family. Jim's father purchased non-alcoholic sparkling wine for the younger crowd. 8-year-old Jim drank a few glasses, then proceeded to convince everyone that he was drunk, staggering around and slurring his words. He kept it up for hours. He told his father that he had had enough and would have to sober up before posing for any pictures. Everyone was entertained by his antics. This early imitation helped shape various winos Jim portrayed years later in stand-up routines. Although Jim's mother never had a problem with alcohol, she had other problems that were just as serious. From Jim's early childhood to well into his teenage years, he and his sisters watched her battle depression and hypochondria. To the neighbors, she was the model housewife who excelled at cooking and homemaking, but inside their home, the children saw a nervous person who inhibited signs of obsessive compulsiveness, mopping the floor repeatedly and getting distraught if a dessert didn't turn out just the way she wanted. She constantly complained about various ailments and sought refuge in bed. When their father was at work, the children sometimes felt abandoned. During these times, Jim and his sisters, during these times, Jim had his sisters to keep an eye on him. None was more vigilant than Joe Gale. She was as much Jim's mother, raised the youngest 3 kids, while Joe Gale was easygoing. That didn't stop her from going after any of her siblings if she felt it necessary. When Jim got into trouble, he would plead with his other sisters not to tell Joe Gale. He didn't mind as much if his mother found out, since she did little to punish him. All right, well, that was the first 2 chapters of this book, and we will see you later. Oh, hey, there's people.